emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop, which had thousands of Hillary Clinton's State Department emails on it. Joining me now to explain further is the author of that report, investigative journalist for RealClearInvestigations.com, Paul Sperry. Paul, thanks for being here. I'm fascinated with this because actually the letter that went to Congress explaining this was a letter that came to me when I was the chairman of the Oversight Committee. So tell me what you found out now about the reality.
That's right. So James Comey told Congress that they had reviewed all of the Clinton emails, hundreds of thousands that were found on the Weiner laptop, but that was not true. They barely looked at any of them. Just 3,000 out of 700,000 were actually individually examined.
Wait. They looked at how many?
3,000 out of potentially relevant 700,000 emails were actually individually examined for classified information and incriminating evidence.
Well, I mean, it did shock us, right? It was days. They told us they're looking into this, and then days later, they somehow reviewed 700,000 documents. How many people actually do you have any idea how many people were actually working on this case and looking at these documents?
I was just going to mention that Peter Strzok, the disgraced agent who was in charge of this mid-year investigation of the Clinton emails, he actually personally handpicked that 3,000 sample, and with two other investigators, they went through them all supposedly and pulled an all-nighter, ordered pizza, and said nothing new here, case closed once again.
So I got to tell you, as a former chairman of the committee, as the former member of Congress, I mean, how can that be anything other than the director of the FBI lying to Congress and misleading us?
Well, he also swore under oath that he had this story that there was this miraculous breakthrough in technology that allowed the FBI to process the Weiner laptop for evidence rapidly, and turns out that doesn't pass the smell test. That didn't check out either. It turns out there was a technical glitch that thwarted that effort. And I was going to mention that, Jason, that when you were on oversight, you were probably wondering the same thing. How in the world could they get through this mountain of evidence in just days after Comey gave you the final all clear on Hillary?
So now that you've unveiled or figured out what's going on with this information, where does this case go next? Is anybody investigating this? You have Michael Horowitz, who is the Inspector General for the Department of Justice. I wonder if he's looking at it. And if you have Attorney General Sessions just today said that he's only operates, without any political influence. Is the Attorney General himself looking at this in lying to Congress? Well,
this evidence that is really, it's been covered up on this laptop, this Weiner laptop, it's still relevant. In the Clinton Foundation probe especially, which is still ongoing, and the whole thing raises more suspicion that the FBI politicized these investigations during the election, and it just begs for an outside independent prosecutor to go back through this evidence, through these emails, and see if the FBI was trying to cover up material evidence in this case.
This is, I really appreciate your good investigative work there. We were always scratching our heads in Congress. The fact that you've unveiled this, it does demand, I think, the Inspector General, the Attorney General himself, and potentially, I would advocate a second special prosecutor to look at this. There was no possible way that that was happening. It creates more legal jeopardy, I think, for James Comey, and it really is a shocking revelation that not only did they use Peter Strzok to look at that information with his hand-picked people, and they, ordered late-night pizza, but come on, the disgraced Peter Strzok at this point, that makes absolutely no sense. Paul, I thank you for your good work and coming on this program to share this with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
He knew that Christopher Steele had been dismissed. He knew that the information in that fake dossier shouldn't go forward. As an attorney, there are things you disclose or recuse yourself. He did neither. So the questions will be about the things he clearly knew and did wrong.
That's California Congressman Darrell Issa, who serves on the House Judiciary Committee, weighing in on the significance of Bruce Orr's testimony before Congress tomorrow. Let's bring in Darrell Issa. He joins us now. Congressman, thank you for coming on America's Newsroom this morning. It's good to see you. So we know some things from the president. We know that he's referenced Bruce Orr, it seems, 8 or 9 times in tweets since August 11th alone. He's called him a disgrace. Heading into this testimony tomorrow, what do the American people need to know about Bruce Orr?
Well, I think if you remember Lois Lerner, who appeared to be a career professional, but when you actually looked into it, you found a partisan operative. Bruce Orr clearly is the same thing. He and his wife, Nellie, obviously, she, of course, was working for the organization, Fusion GPS, that created, paid for, and worked with Hillary Clinton and the DNC to produce this fake dossier, worked with Christopher Steele, all of which then begs the question of why is it there are 60 texts between Bruce Orr and Christopher Steele, of course, some of them even after he was dismissed for wrong behavior as an operative. You look at all of that and you say, wait a second, what we have is him as another link, another partisan, as close to this as Hillary Clinton herself.
Do you think you're going to get any answers to those questions in this hearing tomorrow?
Well, I think because Peter Strzok gave us direct testimony under oath of Bruce Orr's involvement, I think it gives us a strong opportunity to ask him for answers, expect those answers, and if we don't get them, then in fact bring them in from a standpoint of real contempt. You know, one of the challenges we've had, and I don't want to pile on, but it's hard not to be frustrated that the Attorney General is not more effective in ordering individuals to cooperate, ordering the attorneys for the Department of Justice to make sure that Congress gets the fullest answers, rather than often they're sitting, as they did with Peter Strzok, next to him just before he was fired and instructing him he didn't have to answer for some reason that obviously wasn't in the best interest of the president, and yet they were trying to claim immunity under effectively the president's umbrella.
The president tweeted that it was a total joke, he said, that Bruce Orr has still not been fired from, as he put it, Jeff Sessions' Justice Department, and he put justice in quotations. He's still employed at the DOJ, is that correct, Bruce Orr?
He's been demoted twice from being the highest ranking non-political person there, the 4th highest, somebody who, by the way, was paid more than a U.S. senator. But he is, in fact, still employed. We would expect that he needs to be fired and possibly prosecuted, but the process is incredibly slow. And, you know, the American people often complain when they find somebody on administrative leave with full pay, but that's usually what happens in a situation like this. In this case, I would certainly think he should be relieved of all authorities and powers until this investigation is completed at a minimum.
What specific questions are you, obviously the text messages are key for you, as you just laid out for us, but this is a real opportunity for you and your colleagues to ask really specific questions to try to change the outcome to, we didn't get any of our questions answered. What are you specifically going to ask him tomorrow?
Well, we want him to confirm what we already know from hard evidence, that he and his wife were part of a conspiracy to, in fact, create this narrative of involvement and wrongdoing by the president relative to the Russians. The fake dossier certainly involves that. Fusion GPS, including his wife Nellie, clearly involves it, and his continued involvement with somebody who had been dismissed for wrong behavior after the fact clearly gives us. So we have a lot of evidence. Now the question is, can we get him to confirm the evidence, or will he deny the truth right before us in writing?
We will all be tuned in for this highly anticipated hearing. Will be happening tomorrow. Congressman Darrell Issa, thank you for coming on the program this morning.
Thank you.
For more on all of this, let's bring in Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California, who sits on the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Sir, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa.
Was it right to fire Peter Strzok?
It was right. It was time. It was perhaps even too late. Without Peter Strzok and a handful of other individuals, this investigation would never have gotten where it is. You know, ultimately, the president has a special counsel looking into things unrelated to this administration or this campaign in order to try to leverage the president into a box. And the only reason that the former director Mueller is even empowered is people like Strzok set up a false narrative. We're going to be interviewing on the 28th behind closed doors. It's a deposition. Bruce Orr. And the reality is that we're going to be asking him questions about how we came to have a false dossier that his wife was involved in, and that, in fact, he made individual calls to Strzok. So it's not going to end with one disgraced FBI agent. We've got more to do to clean up the Department of Justice.
Are Americans going to hear about that interview behind closed doors? Because Bruce Orr is somebody that we haven't heard from before. And, you know, he's really at the heart of so much that happened.
Well, one of the reasons is that all investigations actually go up, not down, in order to get to the truth. And so this is an important one. The transcript will not be released initially, but I fully expect that there will be follow-up hearings and that appropriately a lot of the information is going to be released, because the questions the American people have can't be answered except by saying, how is it your wife could be part of the false dossier organization? You could communicate with Peter Strzok and more importantly, with a now disgraced and fired informant that you paid money to, and none of this gets disclosed to a federal judge issuing wiretaps that ultimately are very similar to Watergate in spying on a political campaign, this time of Republican Donald Trump.
We have heard reports that Lisa Page said very different things behind closed doors than Peter Strzok said when he was testifying out in the open. Is that true, and will we ever know really what Lisa Page said?
Well, I hope we'll know. I was there for portions of it. She's much more articulate, less cocky. She's a very skilled attorney, so she was both careful with her words, but she was also more, and I'm characterizing, more forthcoming with the obviousness that their statements were, in fact, over the top and are not defendable.
Did you find out what the insurance policy was?
You know, that would be too specific for a deposition release. But the fact is that I think we all know, without having testimony, that the insurance policy was about making sure that Donald Trump would not remain president if he won.
So when Peter Strzok said that we are going to stop this, you don't believe when he said, I meant by we, I meant the American people at the ballot box? She didn't support that, and you don't believe that?
Didn't support it, don't believe it. The insurance policy that they were going to create certainly would not have been that. But let's remember that the fake dossier and this other material was really about stopping him from being president. But if he became president, they needed an insurance policy. To me, was the way I read those texts.
What do you think about the president's latest attack on Attorney General Jeff Sessions? Does it make sense to you, or is it a bad idea?
Well, first of all, I think, in my opinion, the Attorney General has missed opportunities to insert himself time and time again, and I would hope that he would start doing that. He's not recused from his entire job. Having said that, you know, if the Attorney General knew what he knows now, there never would have been a special counsel. Clearly, you know, a lot of false facts led to a lot of people believing that we had to have this investigation, when in fact what we now have is a special investigator, special prosecutor, who's trying to extort through prosecution with Manafort and others people to flip on the president by going back decades with unrelated activities, trying to get them to where they'll do something so that he can make a case that he doesn't have one shred of evidence so far of. And, you know, millions of dollars and months into it, a year into it, one would think he would at least have some evidence, and he doesn't. He doesn't, because it appears as though this was fake and created by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee from the fake dossier on.
Professor Alan Dershowitz was on our air earlier today, and he was saying that Rod Rosenstein is another person who's very conflicted in all this, in the sense that he's acting as sort of prosecutor and overseer, but at the same time, he's one of the most essential witnesses in everything that's happened. Do you agree with that?
Well, you know, Alan Dershowitz is pretty independent. When he calls something like, wait a second, the number 2 should have recused himself because he has clear conflicts, I think he's calling it like a Harvard professor, and I think he's right, that any fair observer would say that if Jeff Sessions, who did nothing more than help the president in his campaign, needed to recuse himself, clearly Rod needs to do the same thing and should have, and it's not too late. The fact is that he continues to actively assert himself in what so far has proven to be an empty case. He should consider that.
Congressman Darrell Issa, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Melissa.
Will speak at his funeral who didn't like him, or Trump not releasing a statement that was more effusive. What's more phony? Or I think they actually do like McCain. I think they liked McCain as long as McCain was criticizing Trump or conservatives or talk radio or Fox. They love McCain. They didn't like McCain when he was the conservative firebrand. They didn't like that at all. All year, I've been letting my audience know about an ongoing war against cash by big government, and it's designed to control your money and your privacy. Recent reports confirm that this war is expanding rapidly, and time is running out to take action. I don't want any of my listeners to fall victim. Thankfully, the folks at Swiss America have detailed all the government's dirty little secrets in their revised report called The Secret War on Cash, Part 2. It's available free to you right now by calling 800-289-2646. That's 800-289-2646. This is an important report that documents real-life events, such as banks refusing to cash checks, cash being confiscated from innocent citizens, and much more. Discover how to win the battle for your hard-earned savings. For your free copy of The Secret War on Cash, Part 2, call now. 800-289-2646. Again, the number, 800-289-2646.
Starting all over again, saying hello to friends.
I think we should get rid of ICE. We should separate out 2 missions and do the anti-terrorism mission, the national security mission, and then on the other side, make sure you're doing, looking at immigration as a humanitarian issue.
The president's deeply immoral actions have made it obvious we need to rebuild our immigration system from top to bottom, starting by replacing ICE with something that reflects our morality and values.
You are listening to The Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. The Democrats have clearly bitten off more than they can chew, and many of them see that the disaster in this Ocasio-Cortez and others who have set their sights on ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement officers who do such a great job for our country, the protests in Portland, all of it. And this is not over. The demonization of government officials carrying out their duties is something that's real and, frankly, puts their lives in danger. Joining us now is Senator Bill Cassidy from the great state of Louisiana. He has some interesting ideas on this this assault on our law enforcement, and we thought we'd check in with him and see how he was doing. Senator, how are you?
Hey, Laura, thank you for having me. I agree with you entirely. This lack of protection for federal officials by state and locals endangers their life as well as endangers their mission. You put it perfectly.
Well, Senator, here's the deal. The Democrats, I think, see that this is a loser for them politically. Only 25% of Democrats want to abolish ICE, according to the the surveys out there. And yet you have people like Kirsten Gillibrand and Elizabeth Warren, both who are 2020, likely candidates. Both of them giving support to Ocasio-Cortez.
Well, I wish that they would give support to the folks who are protecting our borders. You know, I'm looking at some statistics. In 2017, ICE arrested about 130,000 criminals responsible for more than 76,000 drug offenses, 48,000 assault offenses, 11,000 weapon offenses, 5,000 sexual assaults, 2,000 kidnappings, 1,800 homicides, seized 2,400 pounds of fentanyl, about 4 tons of heroin, et cetera, and somehow these are the bad folks. And as you know, I've introduced a resolution calling for the mayor of Portland to resign. This is another example of what you said, truly endangering the lives of those who are attempting to protect us.
Yeah, I think that Americans have to imagine their life and their world without these men and women who are willing to put it on the line for us. Imagine how much more difficult things would be. I mean, it's already hard in major metropolitan and suburban areas with an influx of illegal immigrants, gang members. You've seen the story in Philadelphia where a man who was not detained by state authorities because of the amnesty policies went on to rape a little girl, and stories like this keep popping up in the media because they can't hide the facts. You got states that are adding to this trouble by not allowing immigration officials into their jails to interview people, like California. They won't let them in, correct, Senator?
They will not let them in, but let's even go to a more fundamental principle, Laura. The idea that we all have equal protection under the law, when what happens in Portland, where there's a gang surrounding the office with the ICE members, with the ICE officials and law enforcement agents within, and they can't get out because of the gang following, reportedly throwing feces at the building. When the landlord comes to check on it, threatening the landlord with a needle they say is infected with AIDS, following the ICE people to their daughter's practice, presumably to create a sense of threat. All this is not equal protection under the law. Let's just go to the basics. We're not a banana republic. It should be that all Americans, I would say particularly our federal law enforcement, should be protected, but somehow they're selectively protecting.
Well, and I think, again, the American people are, seeing the truth of what really is motivating the Democrats. There are no solutions. They're not interested. When they say they're interested in border enforcement, they're interested in the rule of law. No, they're not. If they were, this would be the last issue they focused on. They would say, look, whatever we can do to make it easier to get these criminals out of the country, let's help you. But instead, it's resist. And I think it's a loser position for them politically on top of all the other problems it creates. I don't think it's a winner at all. I think it's a fringe anti-ICE movement. And I think your resolution is well conceived and well timed given the public fury over all of this. I want to move on and talk about the John McCain death. Senator Cassidy, I knew you obviously knew Senator McCain, your colleague. Any thoughts on his life, his contribution to the Senate debate?
John McCain was a great American. And he came to Louisiana to campaign with me when I was running to get elected in 2016 or 14. And we went to Shreveport. And we're going around. We're just hitting a schedule. We're just going out through the state. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, up to Shreveport, back to New Orleans. And he's in his late 70s. Doesn't bother him a bit. A veteran handed him a note. Will you call my friend, a fellow Vietnam vet in the hospital? We get in the car as we transition to the next location. He calls up the vet and he says, friend, this is John McCain, and I'm standing with you. And I thought the guy was so committed to his fellow vets, and particularly, I suppose, his fellow Vietnam vets, that even his downtime between events, he was calling to connect with them. He obviously had some faults. He would admit it. But in his concern for fellow Americans, I applaud him.
Well, I couldn't say it better. I mean, he and the